Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do for this question, the question says calculate the distance traveled north and the distance traveled east by a plane on a bearing of 45 degrees. So the first thing you're going to do, hold on, there was another part of this question. So it says for 165 kilometers. Okay, so what you're going to do, you're going to create a diagram representing all of the information in this question. So I'm going to start by, whenever you're doing bearings questions, you draw north, south, east, and west in your diagram. Okay, so I'm going to put north. So I'm just going to label the four main cardinal points. Okay, so once you've done that, now you can go ahead and put in all of the information from the question. It says that it is a plane that travels on a bearing of 45 degrees for 165 kilometers. So what you're going to do, you're going to draw. So this would be the path that the ship takes, that would be between north and east, because it says the distance traveled north and the distance traveled east, so that means the ship must be traveling between those two cardinal points. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to put in the 45 degrees here. Also, this is where your angle is. So your angle would be from north going around, so it goes in this direction. So you're going to put your 45 degrees here, and then this is where your angle would go. Okay, and it says that it went on a bearing of 45 degrees for 165 kilometers. So this would be the distance that the ship takes. Okay, I'm going to label it there. Then it's asking you now the distance that is traveled north. That means we need to find the distance that would be traveled on this side. So what you can do to label the side you want to find, it would be this distance here. I'm going to call it x. And what you're going to do, we're going to form a right angle triangle right here. Okay, so we're focusing on this triangle here, and we're going to use trig ratios to find the missing side, which I labeled x. So we need to ensure that we choose the correct trig ratio as well. So between sine, cos, and tan, we need to see, given these two sides, which trig ratio we should use for our diagram. Now you would see that your right angle would be between the vertical and the horizontal side. This is where your right angle would go. Alright, so what we're going to do, we're going to label both of these sides to see which trig ratio we should use. So I know that based on the fact that this side is touching the angle and it is not the hypotenuse, and I'll explain how I know that this is the hypotenuse later on. Okay, so this is definitely the adjacent side because it touches the angle, but it is not the hypotenuse. Now, how do I know that this is the hypotenuse, this side, the 165 kilometers? Because it's the side that when you draw a straight arrow from the right angle, it points to this side. So I know that the side that is pointing away from the right angle, this is definitely my hypotenuse. So seeing that we have the adjacent and hypotenuse, that means we have to use cosine. So we're going to say cosine cos theta is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. Alright, I'm just going to put this on the side here. Okay, so we know that this is the trig ratio we're going to use, and we're going to go ahead and fill in that information. So we know our adjacent side is x. Our angle would be 45, so I'm going to put cos 45 is equal to x over the hypotenuse, which would be 165. And I'll put back my units later on. So I'll leave out the kilometers for now. Okay, so we need to find x. In order to find x, I need to get rid of this 165. But before I do that, I'm going to find out what cos 45 is. So cos 45 is 0.707 to 3 decimal places. Okay, so what I've done, all I did was plug in cos 45. Then we're going to find out now how we get rid of the 165. Okay, so all I have to do now is multiply 165 on both sides, and I would end up with 0.707 times 165 is equal to x. Okay, so all I have to do now is multiply, and when I multiply, I got 116.6. Let me just keep it to 1. Let me round it to the nearest whole number. So I'm going to round it. I'm going to round 116.655 to 117. And I'm going to put my units there, kilometers. Okay, so I know that this distance here, that would be north. This distance would be 117. Now the next part asks for the distance traveled north, which we just found. Now it asks for the distance traveled east as well. The distance traveled east would be this side here that runs east. So I'm going to call this side y. Now in order to find y, it's going to be a little easier because we already have two sides of our right angle triangle. So I can use Pythagoras' theorem to get y. Now remember, Pythagoras' theorem says that the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square of the other two sides. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and write down Pythagoras' theorem. And I'm going to call the other two sides, the shorter sides of our triangle, I'm going to call those A and B. And the hypotenuse, I'm going to call that C. Okay, so I know that the two shorter sides would have been x and y, and we know that our hypotenuse is 165. So I'm going to go ahead and put that there. So that means x, which is, we found x to be 117. So it doesn't matter which one you call A and B, you just know that it is going to be the two shorter sides. The square, the sum of the squares of the two shorter sides is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. So I'm going to go ahead and add up x squared, so that would be 117 squared, plus the other side, which would be y. I'm just going to substitute that as y squared. So these are the two shorter sides, x and y. We already know our value for x. Then that would be equal to the square of the hypotenuse, which would be 165 squared. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put in those. Alright, before we do anything else, I'm going to figure out what 117 squared is. Okay, so 117 squared is 13,696. Sorry, 13,689 plus y squared. Okay, so all I did was square 117, and I'm going to put this here. Then I'm going to figure out what 165 squared is. That gives me 127,225. All right. Okay, so we can go ahead now and figure out what y squared is. So y squared is going to be, I have to get rid of this number. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to subtract this number from both sides. So that means y squared would be equal to, let me just move this. Okay, so that means y squared is going to be equal to 27,225 minus 13,689. So this is y squared. Okay, so that means y squared is going to be equal to, when I subtract that, I'm going to get alright, I got 13,000, so let me just put that there, 13,536. Now we need to find y. We don't want y squared, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to find the square root of this number. Okay, so we're going to square root both sides to find what y is. Then y is equal to okay, so the square root of this number is, and I'm just going to round it to the nearest whole number. Alright, I got 116.344. I'm going to round that to the nearest whole number, and that would be 116 kilometers. Okay, so now we have the distance that is traveled north would be x, so that goes along north here. The distance traveled east would be y, that would be along east here. So we have the distance traveled north would be 117 kilometers, and the distance traveled east would be 116 kilometers. Both of them are rounded to the nearest whole number.